All right, great. So we're live and welcome back, House Transportation Committee on Wednesday, April 10th. We're continuing our discussions this morning, hearing testimony on Senate Bill 184, which is an act relating to the temporary use of automated traffic law enforcement. And we're lucky to have this morning Lou Miller from Verra Mobility joining us via Zoom. So thank you for joining us, Mr. Miller. And we're looking forward to hearing you. I understand you testified in the Vermont Senate as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I did a few weeks ago.
Okay, great. So we're looking for, this bill came over to us and last week we just started to dive into it. So we've heard from a variety of perspectives. And I think we're really eager to hear your perspective, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about Verra Mobility, and then we can dive into your knowledge and your perspective on this legislation.
Yeah, would be happy to. Thank you, first of all, for having me this morning. I do have a short presentation that I could share. I don't know if that's been distributed to the committee or not. That's really to guide us through. I'm happy to spend the time focusing on issues that are important to the committee, and probably of greater interest is one slide around lessons learned from programs in other states, which I can move to quickly. My name is Lou Miller. I've worked in this space or industry for a little over 20 years, including directly with the implementation and ongoing operation of these types of programs in multiple states. I currently oversee global operations for Verra Mobility, which is an Arizona-based company that supports automated enforcement programs around the world, including over 200 programs in North America, as well as Western Europe and Asia Pacific. That primarily involves automated speed enforcement, red light enforcement, and school bus passing enforcement as the core services that we provide. Would it be okay if I went ahead and shared my presentation on the screen?
Absolutely. So have you given Mr. Miller screen sharing? Yeah, so you should be able, I mean, and for the committee, it's also it's posted on our committee webpage as well, but that'd be great if you would.
Okay, let me just make sure I do this correctly here. Sure. Give me 1 second. Sure. Apologies. I don't know why it's not showing up for me here. Okay. Let's try this one more time. Okay, let's go ahead and share. There we go. Got it now. Thank you.
Okay, sure, no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's coming through. And so we can see.
And let me see if I can go ahead and get this into presentation mode. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So again, just a few slides to guide the conversation. You still hear me? I got a Zoom cancellation message coming up here.
We can see you and hear you.
Okay.
We can see the presentation. So hopefully that's nothing.
It's not coming from our end.
Uh-oh.
Maybe it was.
Huh. Mr. Miller, we still, okay.
There you go.
There we go. I think you're back.
Slide's back.
Slide is back. Is he? We cannot hear you, Mr. Miller. I think I see him. Something happened.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right, how about now?
let's try it again. Yeah,
Okay.
we can hear you.
We're going to try one more time here.
Great.
Just start.
How is that?
We got it. Perfect.
Okay, we'll give this a go here. Just a few slides to guide the conversations. Primarily, when you contract with a vendor for one of these programs, there's probably three
That must be, it should be just internet.
which is usually, wait, did I lose you again?
We lost connectivity. It almost sounded as if your connection, well, yeah, we did lose, and now we're not seeing the.
I can just.
See you.
No, we could listen. We could also, we have the presentation on our. on
Yeah,
our
why
so-
don't, it seems
you
like we might be having some problems with screen sharing, so I'll just go ahead and talk through it if you have copies of it. Apologies for the technical difficulties
No,
here.
but- Yeah, and I would just say when you switch pages, just say what page you're on in the presentation so we
Okay,
can
so
follow up.
yeah, so I'm on page 2, and the primary takeaways here are when you contract with a vendor to support work zone speed safety enforcement program, that generally involves 3 key aspects. One is the technology deployed at the roadside, which can come in either mobile units or portable units, typically deployed, but that don't have to be by the vendor on the roadside in accordance with program rules established by state agencies. And that usually involves independently certified speed enforcement equipment. And an important point there is deployment usually occurs where directed by the state agencies running the program. So not from a vendor deciding where to place the equipment. The programs also generally involve provision of a back office software platform to ingest that data and pre-process it in accordance with state rules, which is then provided typically to a police agency for final review before the public is notified of any violation. And then the third part of programs involves what I would call ancillary or support services, which can include everything from customer service to payment processing to court support to reporting, et cetera. So those are the 3 primary aspects of a program and what you typically see. And different states choose different parts of those services from vendors. But at a high level, those are the 3 main components of a program. If there are any questions, I'll go ahead and move to slide 3.
Great, I'll be able to field questions here and call on people,
Okay.
but
All right, let me move down here in my own presentation. All right, in slide 3, which is entitled Turnkey Program, just a little more information about what that total package of services can look like that a state could choose to contract for. Again, equipment, calibration of the equipment in accordance with applicable laws, the deployment and maintenance of the equipment out into the field, training. We talked about the pre-processing of data and other services. I would probably call out, and we'll touch on the lessons learned slide a little bit later, the critical importance of due process in these programs and understanding how the public can raise questions and have them answered and potentially contest violations if they choose to do so, as well as the importance of public awareness, which is often part of the program. And if you were to contract with a vendor for this, can be provided as part of the program. I'll go ahead and move to slide 4.
okay.
Again, just a little bit more about what happens out in the field. Typically, and in other states, primarily use mobile vehicles that are built out to include the enforcement equipment by the vendor. And that's to allow for easy movement in work zones to safe areas for deployment, as well as to different work zones when necessary. And typically, again, the vendor would, in accordance with a schedule established by the state agency administering the program, deploy those vehicles on a calendar to specific locations for enforcement. Importantly, the systems generally are calibrated by an independent lab to ensure accuracy and correct operation of the systems, and would involve, in most cases, as required by state statute, daily deployment logs and other checks and balances to ensure that the systems are operating correctly. The evidence that's captured itself in the field typically involves 2 images of the rear of the vehicle, sometimes the front license plate as well, depending upon applicable law, to demonstrate progression of the vehicle. And it can include video, which is an optional service if desired as well. I'll go ahead and move to slide 5.
I know there will be questions, but we'll probably let you get through this a little bit.
Sure, no problem. And then slide 5, just a little bit more on we talked at the beginning about the software platform that's provided. That's typically a secure cloud-based platform. Different vendors do things different ways. Vera Mobility uses AWS GovCloud as the backbone for the platform itself. And that platform can provide a variety of services from incident processing, as mentioned, all the way through to court support, depending upon how the state elects to handle case management for violations that are captured by the system. I'll go ahead and move to slide 6.
Okay.
Right. And just a little bit of information from a close by state. We've worked with the state of Pennsylvania as their vendor, the Department of Transportation and Turnpike Commission and State Police since late in 2019, early 2020. They have lots of information, and there's footnotes at the bottom of the slide for material that can be referenced on the effectiveness of the program, both in reducing speeds and crashes within work zones. In a minute, I'll touch on some lessons learned, which some of that comes from Pennsylvania and other states that we've worked with, but a lot of information available publicly on the successes of the Pennsylvania program. And I'll jump down to slide 7. Just some important lessons learned, which may tie into some questions from the committee. We touched on earlier the importance of having a well thought out and established process for contesting and adjudicating violations if required. Grace periods is an important topic, and that often comes in because in an automated enforcement program, there may be some time between when an incident is captured in the field and a notice ultimately may be sent to the registered owner that was involved. And a lot of states have chosen to establish grace periods between incidents that may occur, right, to make sure that the public receives notice or adequate warning of what occurred in an earlier violation. And that's been adopted that was adopted, for example, in the Connecticut pilot program that took place in 2023, and recently in the renewal and updating of the legislation for Pennsylvania as well. Most programs have statutorily required signage, and it's very important to think that through, things like off-ramps and other things like that, to make sure if signage is important to a state, that it's comprehensive and provides adequate notice to the public. There are differences in programs across states around whether worker presence is required for enforcement. Different states take different approaches to that, recognizing that work zones are dangerous places to drive, not only for workers, but also for other drivers in the work zone as well. And that's something that needs to be considered, making sure that there is if it is a registered owner-based program, right, decisions need to be made around whether a transfer of liability will be allowed, right, if the registered owner is not the driver of the vehicle. And then if you were to contract with the vendor for these services, what that fee structure might look like. That's important for public acceptance of the program, and questions that sometimes can get raised around, what are the motivations for the programs in terms of safety dollars, et cetera. So I moved through that pretty quickly, trying to hit on some key topics, but would be happy to stop there and answer any questions from the committee.
Right, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for this. I'm sure that there are some questions from the committee. This is a very helpful presentation too. So Representative Couch?
Yes, thanks for being here. And I'll start my question. Just how many states have either are hiring your company or have used you for a pilot program? And of those, are there states where you do the entire thing, send the person the ticket, versus here in Vermont, this legislation is looking at having the state police actually do the ticket, so there'd be some transfer of information to the state police.
Sure, would be happy to address that. So at Verra Mobility, we've supported programs in multiple states, currently in the state of New York, which is the work zone enforcement program run by the state DOT and the Thruway in New York, as well as we touched on the Pennsylvania program. We were also the vendor for Connecticut's pilot program that occurred in 2023. And personally have worked with other states, including Maryland and Illinois, that have had programs at different points in time. But currently, Verra Mobility supports the programs in New York and Pennsylvania. In terms of the second part of your program, your question, in Pennsylvania and New York, we do provide what I would call that full suite of turnkey services. But an important point is in both of those programs, and you're exactly right about the data transfer, ultimately, and this is very important, the decision as to whether a violation or a notice gets sent to the public is made by the state in Pennsylvania. That's by the Pennsylvania State Police. So within that back office platform that we discussed, there's an online queue or portal or work package or work basket, where the data that's captured is queued up for review by the state police. So any fine carrying notice that would go to the public is approved by the state police. In New York, similar process, but that's done by the state agencies themselves, the DOT and the Thruway, but it is very important. In Connecticut, it was the police, right? So in all of these programs that we've provided support services to, that ultimate decision as to whether a notice would go to the public is made by the state, not by a private vendor.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I might just follow up on that because that was we had a question about that. So with that, in terms of the state police verifying it, so the vendor creates a portal or a way to send that review, that image to state police. And how much time have you heard? How much time does it take to review? And then who handles issuing the ticket in those states where you work with the state police in that way?
Yeah, we typically, I'll use the state of New York as an example. We typically have that information to the state police to review within 5 days of the incident occurring in the field, sometimes faster, sometimes within 2 or 3 days. That would include the images and, if selected, the video associated with the violation, right? As well as through that back office platform, we manage the interface with state DMV agencies to pull registered owner information, and that's all provided as in the online secure web portal to the police for review, so they can see all of the information captured by the systems in the field, as well as the registered owner information, and make a decision as to whether or not a notice should be issued. And that's typically, again, to them in 5 days or less.
And then in terms of the actual process, because it sounds to me like we were hearing some concerns raised about the amount of time that it would take law enforcement to get the image, to print the image, to review it, to send a ticket. But what I'm hearing from you is that this actually can be, depending on what the state, the suite of services that in our case, the Agency of Transportation would engage a third-party vendor to do, it could smooth that out. Like it would be a secure portal. Law enforcement would essentially be saying, you know, check, yes, this is done. And then who does, not to get into the nitty gritty, but to get into the nitty gritty, then who mails the ticket? Would it be the vendor or is that to be determined? Because I think what we were hearing is that about an administrative burden that they were concerned about. And it might just be simply because of a lack of familiarity.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it would be up to the state, obviously, in terms of how you decided to do this. I can share in the programs that we support, we as the vendor do the printing and mailing of anything that's approved by the state. And that can include using if there's a particular traffic citation form or notice that needs to be used, printing in that format to comply with other requirements in the state. So how that would work is after an incident is approved in that secure web portal, we're notified of that through the system and typically do printing on a daily basis of anything that's approved. So if it were approved, let's say hypothetically by the police, we would typically then mail on the approved forms, right, the following business day out to the public. And that could also include if there's copies of the forms that need to be provided to other state agencies, the court system, et cetera, and then delivery of that information as well.
Well, that actually really helped clarify. I think if you were here in the committee, you'd see that there's some clarification on that. So could you estimate, I mean, for just to really put a fine point on it, the amount of time that it would take a state police officer to review each incident?
Yeah, I only paused because obviously that will be in the discretion of the individual reviewing the information. I think it's a very user-friendly web portal, right? That has everything queued up in terms of images, video, data, all on one screen. A minute or less is probably a fair approximation, but I want to be careful that would be up to the discretion of the person making that decision. Other information, I should say, can be provided. For example, if in making that decision, the individual reviewing the information wants to review the calibration certificate, for example, for the equipment, or the deployment log created each day deployed, that can be provided through that web portal to make that an efficient process for the person reviewing the information.
Okay, this is very helpful for the committee in understanding, getting into some of the details of how this technology could work. So, want to open it up to other committee members? Representative Walker, did you? Yeah.
Your questions right on the direction of what I'm talking about.
But anything else
Understanding that, well, then I guess understanding what you're saying is comparing to the other testimony that we heard, a queue would be available if a decision would be made by a law enforcement person, but the clerical portion of the mailing and the activity could be contracted by the vendor. All the work, but the review is still made a decision of law enforcement, but all the clerical portion of that. And however many they choose to hold in a queue versus mail is entirely up to the law enforcement person. But you potentially could handle the clerical work.
Or it depends, it sounds to me, it's also like what kind of contract the state enters into with a vendor. So it wouldn't necessarily be on a case-by-case basis, but it'd be on the design of the services that we would render. So if, for example, I would just say, if the state were concerned or AOT were concerned about the administrative burden on law enforcement, we could, a program or could be tailored to cover, to do some of that. Is that what we're?
That's the direction that those
And I think
questions
I'm
we're asking, we're answering.
Yeah, is that true, Mr. Mill? Like it really?
Yeah, fundamentally, that's correct. Yes, it'll ultimately be up to the state. If the state decides to proceed with a program and contracts with a vendor, whether it's Vera Mobility or someone else, right, to choose those services that they ultimately want the vendor to provide. All of that administrative work can be performed by the vendor. There's typically three, how I typically answer that question is there's three things your vendor can't do, right? One, and I use the word can't probably strongly, but choose where to deploy the systems, right? Typically we would deploy them where directed by the state. Approve, like we talked about, violations to be sent to the public. Ultimately, that decision is made by the state as to whether someone will receive a violation. And then if something is contested, whether that's through an administrative process or through the court system, ultimately serve as the adjudicator or let's say the judge of that proceeding. Everything in between, from the provision of the equipment, the maintenance, the pre-processing of the data, customer service, payment processing, et cetera, can be provided by the vendor if the state were to choose to do so. And that can include even all the way up through the court process. If it was an administrative hearing, helping with calendaring or scheduling of hearings, prepping the evidence or information that needed to be provided as part of that. So again, outside those three things, the state could elect to contract with a vendor to provide those administrative services. Last point I'd like to make, and sorry for being long-winded here, is typically all of that, though, is governed by what we typically refer to as business rules, right? So as we're completing those administrative services as a vendor, we're doing so in accordance with direction or rules provided by the state. So we're really acting, I think the term administrative is a good one, or performing ministerial services in accordance with rules established by the state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, very important, very important.
Yeah.
So we have another question, Representative Shaw.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, I got three different ones. My first question would be, we just spoke with a rental car company about some of the complications that may result as you sending a rental or somebody sending a rental car. Can you comment how other states work with that?
Yeah, that's often defined in statute. There are states that make rules around whether or not violations can be issued to particularly short-term rental agencies. There are mechanisms to establish fleet programs or otherwise to assist, and ultimately, if as part of the rules there were to be violations issued to rental car companies, making sure that ultimately ends up with the lessee, right, of the vehicle. And we can assist with that process through a transfer of liability process like mentioned on the slide. But ultimately, all of that can be governed by those, whether it's governed by statute or by those business rules we just discussed. How if when we were pre-processing the data as a vendor, the information came back as a rental car agency or a rental agency, how to proceed from that point forward.
So would that be part of possibly your case management plan?
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And then our legislation says that ATLE is only in operational work as a president of the work zone. My concern here is we're a small state. And when you do a contract with a contracting agency, I guess what I'm trying to say is if we're not working in a work zone, they don't have another work zone to go to that's been approved. We still must be paying for that equipment and the personnel that are then assigned to the state. Is that true?
Yeah, and it's not well, I'll answer that probably in two ways. Right. One, it's not unusual to have worker presence requirements in legislation like you do in the draft legislation there in Vermont. We have mechanisms when we deploy to capture images and other information to validate, right, that there was work occurring in the work zone, right? On the question of the fee, that would ultimately depend on the fee structure that was chosen by the state. I can give examples, right? If we were to look at some programs in other states, yes, there would be a fixed fee that gets paid, often referred to as administrative fee, for some of the infrastructure that's needed to support the program regardless, right? The vehicles that are acquired, the enforcement system, some staffing, depots for storing those vehicles. But typically, the programs have another part of the fee that's related to whether there's actual deployments or services provided, right? Such that the state wouldn't have to pay, right, if there wasn't a deployment or active work. So to think about it, the vendor's not actually deploying the system out into the field, so there wouldn't be a fee associated with that.
So we would let the agency worry about that.
Yeah.
And I guess you got that. And something's kind of picky. Our legislation says only take a picture of the rear plate, and then you mentioned front plates. We're a two-plate state. Is there an advantage of the two plates? Taking an image of both plates?
Yeah, there can be. And you can focus on the plate, not the driver of the vehicle for privacy reasons, if that's important to the state. I'll give a couple examples. In heavy traffic, the ability to either capture the front or the rear license plate can help if there's obstructions in the field of view, right? And then a second example would be semis, right? Where oftentimes the cab, right, is the owner of the vehicle, and the trailer can actually be leased and be separately plated, right? And so if that is a concern in the state, that's something that the front license plate could be used for. But again, all of that, there are mechanisms within the system and the back office platform, if you were to go that route, right, with a vendor, to ensure that images of drivers, right, aren't included in the evidence package that would be shared. I can say in both New York and Pennsylvania, they do capture front images, but only rear license plates are not only used, but only license plate images are used by the program.
Do you have a way of blanking out or not even taking a photo of the driver?
Yeah, you could. Some of that can be accomplished through the angling of the system or through redaction that occurs in the back office platform.
Thank you.
So we do have to wrap up, but we have a temper. I'm seeing one more question and see where we are.
Thank you. So sort of getting back to the burden, if our state police is the ones who do the ticketing, they also, said, hey, if I pulled somebody over, I see the whole thing, so I can, if it goes to court or it's contested, I've seen it all. So you mentioned, the calibration, third-party calibration data for the stuff is right there, will be part of the packet, I guess. And then the log, would that log include like pictures of the setup, and so that even if an officer wasn't there, they could look and see, how that the process met the appropriate standards.
Yeah, that's correct. So a typical evidence packet, or what would be visible to someone from the state police reviewing the evidence, could include things such as, if you have required signage, which I think you will, right? Images of that, pictures, time-stamped images of the signage to ensure that it was in place. As mentioned, there's optional video if someone wants to see an 8 or 10-second video clip, right, of the incident beyond the images. Again, that's a discretion. That would be up to the discretion of the state as to whether that should be included. The deployment log itself that's captured with each deployment notes specific information and is certified by the operator in the field. And that also can include, certifications around worker presence occurring as well. So some of that would be established through the program rules and procedures established by the state if you were to move forward as to what should be included in the evidence package from the vendor, but it can be extremely comprehensive if desired.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Miller, I have one final question, and that it came up earlier in earlier testimony.
Mm-hmm.
Could you speak a little bit about calibration of the equipment, what that means in the context of this technology?
Sure.
Because I've heard different things, and there's some language in the bill that is, we're not sure if it's on point with how this technology works.
And so I would generally break that into two components. There's usually requirements under some defined cadence, which is typically annual, for calibration or certification of the speed enforcement device itself, right? That it's operating properly, probably not that much different than what police would generally do with equipment used for this purpose. Legislation in states often require that be performed by an independent third-party lab as opposed to the vendor itself, right? And so effectively, the device is either in the field or through delivery to that independent lab, certified as operating correctly on a regular cadence. In most states, that's an annual requirement. So that's one piece, I would say. Secondly, the systems themselves often through program rules or other words are required to demonstrate correct operation when deployed. And that's usually through self-testing that occurs of the system both before the start of a deployment and at the end of the deployment to ensure that it's operating in conformance with manufacturer specifications, which is usually then documented in that deployment log that occurs every day. So just to summarize, you would typically have an annual calibration, right, of the systems, and then daily checks at the start and end of each deployment to ensure correct operation, all of which documented in logs and available for whoever reviews the incidents at the state to review.
Great, that is very helpful. I just really appreciate how you've been able to give us the big picture as well as the granular details. It's been really
very helpful testimony. So we appreciate you coming in today.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Mr. Miller, really, and we look forward to letting you know how we do with this. With this legislation.
Good luck. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you, and if there are any follow-up questions, obviously happy to come back or answer those at any point in time, but wish you the best in how you decide to proceed here.
Great, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was very helpful for the committee. So digest all that, take it in. I think I for myself, I'll say a lot of pieces just kind of started to kind of gel and come together, imagining how this worked. But to use a transportation metaphor, we're going to shift gears. We were scheduled for a break, but since we had a break earlier, we're going to forego that break, even though it's a warm committee room, and we have some guests with us. And I just wanted to allow Representative Shaw to introduce some folks,
Sure.
but just to remind the committee, so we're kind of shifting this later today. Well, we're going to continue to now shift gears towards miscellaneous motor vehicle bill, S309. There are a few things that have been buttoned up, and there are a few things that are out lingering. So we want to, by the end of the day, we're going to have some time for a committee discussion to see where the committee is on a number of things. One of the topics that Representative Shaw brought to us was EV plates. And so we have some folks here to join us, but do you want to say anything additional?
Oh, thank you for the wonderful. We talked about this in committee the other day, and there was some interest in continuing to talk about it. So we've invited Mike Scazza, who's chief of West Rutland Fire Department, and also the executive director of the Vermont Fire Training Academy in Pittsburgh. I go plug for Pittsburgh, and to speak on this. And Dean Gilmore is the chair of the Government Affairs Committee of the Vermont State Firefighters Association, who's on the Jens Fire Department. So, and happy to have them in the room.
Great, so welcome. Well, gentlemen, do you want to come together? And so quick, we have two chairs. We have two chairs that we can situate. There's a chair shortage in the State House, so we feel lucky to have two.
Like musical chairs all the time.
Yeah, especially the Rutland delegation seems to steal the chairs.
Yeah.
They always know that. So we always respect that.
Yeah.
Until there's.
I think there's going to be too much noise in the hallway. I apologize for the heat. We can try to open windows. It's been unseasonable. It gets really cold or really hot, and but we have you for half an hour, so hopefully we can do it. So welcome. I want to welcome you to the. Yeah, this is. There's a door. So welcome. I don't. If you could just formally introduce yourself for the record, and then we're interested in hearing your thoughts on the idea of plates in Vermont.
Sure. I'm Michael Scazza. As Representative Shaw just said, I'm the chief of the West Rutland Fire Department. But today I'm here in the capacity of the director of the Vermont Fire Academy.
I'm Dean Gilmore, a past assistant chief of the New Haven Fire Department, presently serving the Jens Fire Department. Been in the fire service for going on 49 years. And I'm here to represent the Vermont State Firefighters Association. This is something that we really need.
Great. Well, thank you both for being here and taking the time to join us. And as you can see, we can have people join us by Zoom, but it is always nice to have people in the room with us. So we look forward to just hearing your thoughts. This is something that a topic that we're considering potential inclusion in our miscellaneous motor vehicle bill. So I know that Representative Shaw has been involved for many years in fighting fires and involved, and so safety concerns around electric vehicles. I just want to hear your thoughts.
Sure. So I thought that I would start by, unless you'd like to start. I thought I'd start by just kind of giving you a kind of a view of how a response to an electric vehicle incident differs from a gasoline powered vehicle, because there are some stark differences in the hazards that that those vehicles present to responders and to victims of crashes and fires. So I'll give you kind of a quick overview of how things differ for us as emergency responders. And with the number of electric vehicle registrations increasing in Vermont, I think it was about 44% just last year. We are ramping up the training efforts in emergency services so that we can adequately address emergencies involving electric vehicles and the nuances that they present to us. But we're also looking to grow the toolbox as well. So any tools that we can have to more efficiently and effectively mitigate these emergencies is a huge help to us. So when an electric vehicle is involved in fire or a motor vehicle crash, responders need to quickly identify the vehicle as electric, immobilize the vehicle, and then disable the vehicle before they can do anything else, before they can mitigate the emergency that they are there that they were called for. So with gasoline-powered vehicles, responders are quickly able to immobilize the vehicle by simply chalking the wheels. Yet an electric vehicle has such high torque that it can overcome those traditional methods that we use and become mobile again unexpectedly while the responders are in close proximity. Gasoline-powered vehicles are obvious when their engines are running due to the noise of the motor, signaling responders that the ignition needs to be turned off and the vehicle is unsafe. But electric vehicles can be on and be completely silent, ready to move unexpectedly at any moment. This can have a catastrophic effect and have catastrophic results if responders are working near or within the vehicle. If an electric vehicle is not properly identified prior to a vehicle extrication, responders and victims are placed at additional risk by damaged high voltage components or potentially cutting through high voltage circuits in the course of the rescue. Added measures need to be taken to disable electric vehicles during an emergency, but those methods can only be employed if responders properly identify the vehicle as electrically powered. Once identified, the vehicle can be disabled by disconnecting the 12-volt battery, cutting specific cables in the vehicle that are specified by the manufacturer, or pulling special fuses that are designated by the manufacturer. With each model being different, responders have to consult emergency response field guides to determine the appropriate disabling action, to determine where it is safe and unsafe to cut during a rescue. And with so many variations across so many models, you can see that the emergency response to an electric vehicle incident can be very complicated. It's not very often that we have to stop, pull out a manual and do research on the side of the road before we start the job that we're there to take care of. But this is the case with electric vehicles. This gets even more complicated when we have to consider special tactics if the vehicle is on fire or at risk of being on fire. Physical damage, overheating, overcharging, manufacturing defects, even mismatching parts on an electric vehicle can cause lithium-ion batteries to enter a condition known as thermal runaway. This is where a single cell failure results in a reaction that generates heat, and the intensity of the reaction increases because of that heat. And it's not long before that battery explodes into fire and is often uncontrollable. These fires produce copious amounts of acutely toxic and extremely flammable gas that creates environments that are quickly untenable to victims and responders. So identification is really key to getting ahead of that process. I'd like to focus on electric vehicle identification now and provide some insight surrounding how complicated this can be in an emergency. Vehicle manufacturers have done very well to make electric vehicle models look remarkably unrecognizable from their gas counterparts. Many times you can put an electric model and a gas model side by side, and they're essentially twins to the naked eye. In many cases, the differentiation between a gas-only model and an electric model is as subtle as a variation in the exterior trim package. Some manufacturers rely on subtle differences in what they call exterior badging to identify a model as an electric vehicle. And that can be so subtle as to have the emblem on the vehicle outlined in a blue color. Some manufacturers, such as Tesla, Rivian, and Lucid, have no electric identifying badging on the vehicles whatsoever. assuming that their name recognition alone will help you to identify that it's an electric vehicle. Many of our responders have never even seen those brands, yet they're in the state on a regular basis. To make identification even more of a challenge, the level of inspection that must be done to identify an electric vehicle has to be done in poor lighting, often with smoke and fire conditions obscuring the manufacturer's identifiers, or damage that has destroyed the exterior identifiers of the vehicle. The provision of a universal electric vehicle identifier, such as displayed on a license plate, would aid responders in the rapid identification of an electric vehicle. As a first responder, I can tell you that even in the most damaging of crashes, license plates often fare well and are often still legible even after experiencing a crushing impact. Providing a license plate with a universally recognized identifier for electric vehicles will decrease the time it takes responders to identify an electric vehicle, allow strategies and tactics for victim rescue and fire suppression to be developed more quickly and accurately, result in improved outcomes for injured crash victims, and improve the safety of responders who are working at these incidents. Responders work within a time frame referred to as the golden hour and the platinum 10 minutes. The golden hour is the target time in which a trauma patient needs to be in an operating room to have maximum survivability. To reach that goal in the field, we responders work within the platinum 10 minutes, which is the target time to have access to the patient and have them en route to that definitive care. We have the potential to shave minutes off of the ticking clock if we can immediately identify a vehicle as electric. And this proposal seems to be a great step forward to help us do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. And I see, it looks as if it's written testimony, and it could be helpful after following up if we could get a copy of your written testimony. Perfect, that's great, thank you.
We're here today to speak on behalf of the Vermont State Firefighters Association in support of a new proposal to require hybrid and fully electric vehicles to be identified with markings on the registration license plate. These vehicles present many more challenges and hazards to our fire and rescue personnel when involved in motor vehicle crashes and or fires. Not having a uniform identification system creates a challenge, as auto manufacturers do not do a good job on identifying their vehicles. When they do identify it, usually very small and in various places. Some have no identification at all. Having a uniform marking system would help an incident commander in operational decision-making, i.e. EV fires require many more gallons of water. Being able to identify the vehicle sooner would result in more water being dispatched sooner. When an EV is burning, you must have a continuous operation in order to mitigate the situation. In motor vehicle crashes, these vehicles present more challenges and hazards to our firefighters. Extrication procedures become more complicated and dangerous. Having to avoid cutting into high voltage wires, etc. The Institution of Engineering and Technology Guide for First Responders states we should be using appropriately insulated automotive hand tools. And in this book, which is their guide, it's listed out for first responders, step 1, step 2, step 3. We don't have time to read that, to figure it out. And they're also saying that we need lineman's gloves, which require testing and inspection constantly every time they're used and even when they're not used. We don't have that kind of equipment. We have no access to the batteries and are unable to monitor their status for overheating and bursting into flames. There are many manuals or guides, training, etc. out there, but who has time to follow a guide when you arrive at an incident? The bottom line here is anything we can do to protect our firefighters, we fully support. Having a uniform identification system that everyone understands would set the stage for early identification, operational procedures, and safety precautions, hopefully resulting in a positive ending to the incident. I have here some samples of what other, this is Australia, which is an awesome idea. It's a little metal tag that they could use the existing plate and just riveted to their existing plate. And I'll leave these with
Make sure to leave one right there because we'll be having the commissioner of the Department of Motor Vehicles and right after. Make sure she'd be.
State of Wisconsin, they use stickers. This is in the UK. They just have a small plate anyway. They color code it on the end of their plate. The others, this is the state of Massachusetts, it says electrical vehicle, and then have a little electrical car
Like
on
imprinted.
the site. So there's many different ways that we can do it, but it should be something, at least like we make a good idea.
Which one is which one are you pointing to when you?
The Australia.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah.
Okay, Nate.
Wait, yeah, right?
We can vote on it.
I'd just like to point out that we are so far behind the 8 ball, and it's because of the fast pace of technology. And the fire service has never consulted in any of this. We're just handed what's given to us, and we have to learn how to deal with it. So this is a good step to help us out.
And I'm curious too, I mean, last year, we had testimony in kind of, in the wake of the derailment in Ohio, with the trains, but we did get to hear testimony about the hazmat, unit here. And does the fire, do you connect with those folks? Do you overlap in training or share
Yes.
information?
Yes, we do have that training once a year because it's required by the federal government.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have, a lot of us have the state hazmat team come and do training.
Because it seems to related, right? Just kind of some of those things. So that's good. Well, I really appreciate both of you.
The issue with the hazmat team is they're not readily available,
Right,
because we don't all have them in our own.
to kind of serve the whole state. And so I see a couple of questions. First, I want to say thank you for coming and sharing this, your perspective and through your testimony today. So I see Representative Burke and Representative Lally.
Thank you. It's very sort of terrifying information as an EV owner. How many sort of, bad accidents have firefighters in Vermont had to respond to? Do you know?
So I asked that question in preparation of coming today, and the current incident reporting system that is used across the country doesn't allow us to differentiate between EV vehicles and gasoline powered.
Okay.
That's being revised so that data can be collected. So unfortunately, we don't have Vermont specific data to share with you.
Just curious.
Yeah, I did seek it out, but
Ah,
wasn't able to find
Great.
it.
Thank you very much.
So we have a couple of questions, Representative Lally. And then
Yes, I was wondering if about EV bikes, and which I imagine are probably stored inside people's houses because they're quite valuable, which would seem like this would be quite problematic. Just if you could speak a little bit about that as a sort of niche, problem and what you're seeing with that.
So luckily, it could be an issue in Vermont. It's not as big of an issue as it is in the larger cities and in particular on college campuses. That's where I would worry about it first in Vermont. You're right. It's an expensive investment. People want to protect that investment. They bring them inside, they charge them inside. There's a whole slew of public education campaigns to stop that practice. In fact, the city of New York prohibits it in public housing because there is a risk whenever you charge a lithium-ion battery, if something goes wrong, and it's that laundry list of things that I mentioned, overcharging, charging with the wrong charger, little things that the average user wouldn't think about, there could be a fire as a result of that. So the best action is to do charging outside of outside of buildings, away from where it could be a hazard. And it's not just e-bikes, it's hoverboards, it's all lithium-ion batteries, and they're in everything these days. So we need to be keenly aware of that. So
we have about 10 more minutes left. So I see Representative Bartholomew, Couch, and McQuay.
His power walls would be the same thing. In any case, your picture suggests there is no national or regional standard for how we would approach this. We'd have to just decide.
Yes.
And it seems like one of the obvious problems here is that there are some days you're out there, there are more out-of-state plates than in-state plates. So I'm just wondering, is this really helpful with so many people coming to Vermont? We get all of the EVs registered in Vermont labeled, but you got all those other cars.
So there are some commonalities, and you're right, I'm not aware of the standard, but there are some commonalities in the way that electric vehicles are identified using license plates. Color blue is popular, triangles are popular, color orange is popular, and the letters EV are popular. living near Killington, I see a lot of electric vehicles pass through my town with out-of-state license plates, and they're noticeable, even though they're a little different. They do stand out. In Massachusetts puts a red EV on their license plate. And I think with that narrow selection of options, we can work that into responder training programs so that they're looking for that difference in the plate.
Guess my question should be more focused. Do you know about, so the most common plates we're gonna see are New York, Connecticut, New England, Ontario, do those provinces and states all have this, or do you know which states around us do? I'm just trying to capture them, if we're trying to do this, we capture the most number
I
of
spent some
vehicles.
time yesterday trying to figure that out, but also trying to go through their government bureaucracy to find pictures or, there's a lot of stuff out there, but it's just not easy to understand because you end up into their laws, which one of these here, Wisconsin, couldn't get a picture, but it states that it's a sticker. So it doesn't really show what the sticker looks like, but there's a lot of it out there, but there's nothing standard.
Yeah, Wisconsin uses an orange sticker, orange and black sticker that goes on the top right-hand corner of the license plate. Massachusetts uses an EV, and Dean has a picture of that here. Illinois uses an EL. They put an EL on the plate.
It just seems like we should focus on the most common plates we're gonna see to cover the most number, the highest percentage of vehicles we can.
Might be a good question for the DMV.
We'll be talking with James.
Yeah, and that's Massachusetts.
It's pretty obvious.
And we see a lot of those, obviously, in mines.
Representative Pouch?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for being here. My question's sort of the same, and you mentioned when you approach the vehicle, I mean, ideally you want to disable it. And when you said that, the electric car, like, I don't know, to actually disable it. But you said the makers have procedures that, help you along. And is there any effort on the federal side to sort of require like a master switch somewhere?
I'm not aware of that. I can't answer that. So as a user, turning the vehicle off, setting the parking brake are the first steps that we hope are taken. And then once we identify the vehicle as electric, if it's in a risk condition, we refer to that field guide, and then every manufacturer is a little bit different. Some of them have special wires that are in a location that's accessible to emergency services that we have to access and cut. Some of them say disconnect the battery, and the guide tells us where the battery is because it can be in someplace different on every car. So that's the challenge, is that there's no uniformity to it. So the key is quick identification so that we can get into that field guide and see what we have to do to disable it.
Okay, thank you.
So this is like, so if you come upon this vehicle and we don't have EV and you're unsure, or if you find out that it is, and what if it's already engulfed in flames? Like, do you have some type of a blanket that you put over, or you just call hazmat to come because there's an EV? I mean, I guess everybody has to leave the area.
So if an EV vehicle is on fire and the batteries are not involved, it's a car fire like any other.
Okay,
The complication comes when batteries get involved. If the
how do
battery,
you know?
because the fire is much more violent.
Okay.
And it's a much bigger conflagration that happens much more quickly
With the battery?
with the batteries.
Okay,
And the location. So in most vehicles, batteries are typically installed along the floor of the vehicle.
okay.
It's not common to see fire originate or be in those areas early in the fire. So if you've got fire within the floor compartment on an electric vehicle, that's a good indicator. It's a good indicator. There's also, when batteries burn, they burn with what's called jetting, because they build pressure and they off gas, and those gases are flammable. And they literally throw jets of flame out of them when they're burning. So it can be identified as having battery involvement.
So you're not gonna be doing any
So
For staying back.
when batteries are involved, one of the tactics is do nothing. It is to protect exposures if,
Right.
if it's near if it's threatening other objects. And one of the options is do nothing because, of course, we know that it takes a minimum of 3,000 gallons of water is the recommended practice if if the batteries are involved. But we have case studies that have used thousands more gallons just to try to suppress those fires. The bottom line is you can't put them out. And even when you do put them out, they run the risk of reignition for 48 to 72 hours after extinguishment. So the threat continues when that vehicle gets towed off and stored somewhere. So, and you asked about blankets.
Yeah.
The blankets are in use in Europe. They won't extinguish the fire, but they will offer some protection. And where it's used commonly in Europe is if a vehicle's in a parking garage and it catches on fire, they'll enclose it in that blanket to remove it from the parking garage. It suppresses the fire, contains it a little bit, and allows them to get it to a safer place so that it lessens the exposure.
Right.
And they're one-time use.
And they're one-time use. And I can only imagine what they cost.
I'm just worried about the protection of firefighter who's there, trying to. figure it out.
There's YouTube videos that will show some departments, using up to 30,000 gallons of water to put out a Tesla that was in a car accident.
And of course, we worry about runoff from those, from the extinguishing agent. You know,
Correct.
if you're applying copious amounts of water, are we creating hazardous materials as runoff and making that into a bigger situation? So that's why one of the tactics is let it burn.
Yeah.
If you could safely do so.
Very sobering to hear the stories of the safety concerns of our first responders, and. So, yeah, we have a couple, just 2 minutes, Scott. I just wanted to tease you, so.
Any experience with vehicle fires, electric vehicle fires? Think about
I have been personally, I've been to crashes with electric vehicles. I have not had an electric vehicle fire yet.
I've only had experience with one, and it turned out it was not the batteries, it was inside the compartment. And that was an out-of-state car pulled into a parking lot and said the car was on fire, and that's all the information we had. Yeah, we lucked out.
And as you said earlier, there's no data about how many electric vehicle fires we've had. Yeah,
There
just say nothing.
there's national data that predicts the frequency of fires based on the type. So to put you at ease, electric vehicles are the least likely of hybrids and plug-ins to experience a fire. Hybrids are the most likely, the dual fuel.
Oh, because of the dual fuel. Oh.
And a lot of that, they believe, is because of the how closely they have to assemble everything to the combustion engine. So those are the most likely, according to national statistics, to have a fire incident. But electric is the lowest. So those of you driving electric vehicles, rest of the leaves.
And gas cars have fires as well.
Exactly.
And prevalence of gas car fires versus electric car fires.
We have that statistic in our training program, but I should have paid more attention in class. I don't have that one on the tip of my
The
finger.
gas fire doesn't burn as hot.
Correct. Much more manageable.
Yeah, much more manageable. Once you knock it down, put it out. Electrical fires, it takes a lot of water to get, you knock them down. Representative Shaw should be able to pull up a YouTube video for you to watch one of these things.
Sure.
Is that the one you shared?
Very useful, hands-on. Here.
Yeah.
I've seen videos.
Well, I could speak for the community. We appreciate you coming in, and also your solutions oriented approach about to share what examples from other states and other countries, what they're doing. So, because everything, and even something obvious, it's going to take some time to work through the details. So I know this afternoon, we're spending a good amount of time with the commissioner of the Department of Motor Vehicles, and we'll be talking about license plates on a few topics, and this is one of them. So, you know, sometimes we get down into the weeds, but I think the bigger picture is about safety and so that first responders know what they're getting into. I mean, they can easily identify a vehicle and know how to approach it. And just want to thank you for your work and, you know, serving Vermonters and keeping us safe. And we'll keep, I know that a member of our committee will absolutely be keeping you in the loop on how we proceed with this. And so I think I can feel already that, you know, there's interest from the committee, and then the timeline is often, you know, how that will come into play. As much as we sometimes like to get things done right away, sometimes it takes a little bit of planning and time to work through the logistics. I just want to thank you again.
Thank you.
And look forward to getting anything that you send us by email. We'll get up on our committee page, and which can be helpful for when we're looking for some of the testimony. And it'll be listed under your name and under today's date. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. So for the committee, I know we have some people have things happening at noon. I kind of wanted to break by 11:45. Great. So because I know that there are lots of things happening outside the building, but just wanted to kind of regroup. You know, it's been a little bit regroup since, you know, we've been spending so much time. We're shifting back into committee just to see where we are. And I think Jen Carby is going to be joining us. So maybe to speak to that, just for some kind of housekeeping and logistics and everything. Jen Carby is going to be the attorney who's helping us bring the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill and the T-bill to completion. So, and to update the committee, the T-bill was voted on in the Senate Transportation Committee yesterday. It was voted out of committee. They made a lot of changes. It's going to be going to Senate Finance. And when I have a sense that the bill has settled, we'll have Logan Newberry and Jen come in to give us kind of an overview what the differences are. I can already say that I think there's significant changes that it's most likely, I think the committee will agree that we're going to need to go to a committee of conference, but you know, don't want to say that until like we see how the bill goes. The Transportation Committee has kind of closed down just for the newer members, like in especially the second year of the biennium. But the morning committees shut down earlier. And in the case this year, given Senator Mazza's, you know, and he just announces that he's retiring. But given that, and that two members of the Senate Transportation Committee are on the Senate Appropriations Committee, the committee's kind of closed down. That doesn't mean that they can't, you know, if we send them things, they will convene the committee, but they're not going to be meeting regularly. And so for our work, I'm hoping that we can move like by the end of this week or maybe next week, kind of finalize our work on the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill. There are a few things that are dangling out there. We'll be hearing a few, you know, some more testimony on that. And then we need to, you know, with S-184, as members will see, like the end is going to come crashing down kind of quickly, you know, at the end. And I'm also, I hope you'll work with me because we don't have a dedicated attorney. We have somebody covering our bills, but it's not the same as having a dedicated attorney that we can call on and bring into committee to do things. So it's a little bit slower, the process. So I'm trying to anticipate some of that so that we can get things out on time, you know, and so there will be a, you know, as you saw at crossover, there's a big backup in Ways and Means and appropriations. And our bills that don't need to necessarily go there, but like, for example, I think S-184, the House Judiciary Committee is going to need to have a look at it. They might not need to take possession of the bill, but we need to give them time to do that. So before I move into some of the, how that makes sense to everybody, is everyone on board with that? So I think this afternoon, we have some more testimony scheduled that had been rescheduled from last week on our snowy day from the commissioner of motor vehicles. That'll kind of help us with a few outlying issues or topics that we are considering for the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill, specifically the EV plates, maybe, and other motorcycle license plates and so forth. And we're also going to be finishing up, we're getting some information from the commissioner. We heard last week, Representative McGill came in from the House Human Services Committee to talk about some language that the Human Services Committee had been in their budget letter to the House Appropriations Committee. And that language was taken out of the bill. And I thought, I realized that the committee hadn't seen what that language was. So I asked Jeannie, I have some of that language. It has to do with non-driver identification for folks who've been in DCF custody, experience homelessness. So the commissioner will be speaking a little bit about that. So I thought just for clarity within the committee, that you could just at least see what that language was that did not go in the big bill, but came, we pulled it out here to here. So, and there are a couple of different paths that we can take. We'll hear from the commissioner. The commissioner of DMV does something similar with the Department of Corrections, and we'll hear her talk about that and the process that they went through to do that. I think the Human Services Committee didn't take testimony on this. They didn't take testimony from DMV or DCF. And so we're going to give it some airtime. And there are a couple of different ways that we can move forward with that. And I have a couple of thoughts that after we hear the testimony that I'll share with the committee on how we might move forward with that. So those are just kind of the loose items that we're working on. I think it might make sense to have the conversations about what we want to do with the different topics after this afternoon, just because then we will have heard all of it. So I think there's the vulnerable user language that Kate has worked on, and that we've heard some testimony since, that we've heard from Local Motion, and we've heard from Lieutenant Ravlin, and we've heard from AOT. So just want to digest a little bit of that so we can figure out what we might want to do. And then the EV plates and motorcycle license plates. And I think that's what I'm hoping to accomplish in our discussion later today. Just wanted to plant those seeds to give you. But are there other, I know that there's another topic that we might make time for too, which has to do with distracted driving and education that's been percolating. And I know that Representative Shaw is doing some work on that, and I'll let him speak to that one if he so chooses. So anything else that
How's our road trip coming along?
so we just, so a field trip.
Field trip.
April 24th. We just got April 24th. And I'm going to be working as the committee, I think, is aware, we're going to do this with the House Commerce Committee, and I'm going to be meeting with Chair Marcotte later today just to figure out where we stick together, where we might go on. But it would be to Beta Technologies and potentially going to Beta, yeah. So we go together, and then we might potentially, the Commerce Committee is making a few stops, and we may not join them on all of them. But one that we might also do together is UVM, I think, has a program that's a transportation lab that I want to learn a little bit more about whether that's worthwhile.
Transportation Research Center?
Yeah, so we might want to go do that.
Their report.
And then we might also want to go check out a public works project in the city of Burlington if we're there. So we just have to figure.
Maybe Al's French fries.
Yeah. Or maybe try someplace different.
So Laura's in here, so we can talk about it.
Yeah, the 24th.
The 24th, which is a Wednesday. So, so we'll be I'll be coordinating that and, the committee assistant in commerce is a UVM grad, so I'm gonna work with him because he just kind of knows the lay of the land of Burlington and I mean, he's interested in helping. So Representative Bartholomew, I saw your hand shoot up.
Yeah, I don't want, at the risk of heading down a conversation about specifics, I'm just wondering if we went with the EV kind of marking, would we need to do an exploration about what it is?
I think we're gonna have some more testimony from the commissioner, and if we could just hold off, we need to definitely have some discussion on it, but let's get some more information about from that. Because
I'm just kind of
DMV.
in envisioning all these different examples we have to sort through as opposed to let's have someone else come up with a plan. Anyway, I didn't want to open that whole thing other than to just kind of, I don't know.
I
Just
think,
stop it.
no, so we'll get there. I think we need to get there. So, and I think there's some language and that will help us get there.
We will.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it is warm in this committee room today. So. I'll fill you in.
Conducive to that.
So what we're gonna do is we have the floor at 1 o'clock and then please come back into committee. We have testimony lined up. And I think we'll be able to, and then I think we're gonna be able to have enough time to have some committee discussion this afternoon before we.
Are we taking up the compact bill?
What
The
the-
compact bill, is that getting?
I think-
I'm just saying the reporting of it. I'm
The
just.
social workers.
I don't know, we'll see, we'll see,
the-
it's so.
Not us.
Yeah. No, I just throwing it out there. I don't know. Isn't
You-
it?
Tomorrow.
Oh,
it's
no,
tomorrow.
it's tomorrow, and I think,
Licensure.
yeah, and that bill needs to make 2 stops. I think it needs to stop in Ways and Means and an approach, and I don't think it's gone to.
No, one that's been getting delayed.
Oh, you mean captive insurance?
Sure.
I don't know.
100 pages.
I don't know, it's like a daily thing. It's
Yeah,
up
yeah,
today.
yeah. I'm just saying if that is up.
I think they're
sure
trying,
might get.
I think,
And that'll be
the
riveting.
House is trying to come to some consensus with the Senate.
Yeah. I mean, I just throw it out there because that could move.
Yeah, so I think the
We don't need to be
commissioner,
there for it.
yeah, the commissioner is, I think the commissioner's testimony, she was halfway through or mostly through
Yeah.
the DMV modernization and the other topics, I think she will be flexible, we're coming off the floor and that Jimmy you keep her in touch. But yes, so I think, we might have a little bit, it might not be 10 minutes on the floor. So, all right, so with that, I think we can end our live stream.